Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I can't even talk today. I'm so hyped up. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Once again, Joe Nice coming to you as always live and direct on a May 25, 2021, May the 25th, 2021, May 25, 2021. As is always the case, you know where I am, you know where to find me. Today, there's a chat banner going right up, scrolling along. If you want to find me, you know where to find me. On all of my social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, Mixcloud, all of that's there, Joe Nice DJ. We also today launched the website. The website, www.joenicedj.net, JoeNicedj.net, joenicedj.net. You've seen me over the past several weeks to maybe a couple of months or so wearing different shirts that have different messages and or different images on them. Me and my team have slowly been cultivating, building, brewing, and percolating a website that will allow everybody to wear some of the designs that I've been wearing because it is important. It is important that we continue to push these messages of humanity, freedom, equality, and survival, otherwise known as the four fights. So the designs are available, www.joenicedj.net. There's also a new Instagram account, Shop Joe Nice DJ, ShopJoeNicedj, Shop Joe Nice DJ. This is one of the designs I'm going to show you to you here. Take a look at the words. It says white supremacy, persecution, capitalism, segregation, patriarchy, slavery, hate, inequality, genocide, colonialism, racism. And you'll see down the middle that there are letters missing. There are letters missing from each of these words. The letters that are missing spell the word reparations, which is what American descendants of enslaved Africans should be receiving from the United States federal government. Reparations. And we've talked about on Joe and Cat Chats on a couple of different episodes, pathways to reparations, that we must pursue reparations through a framework called ARC. Acknowledgement, redress, closure. Acknowledgement, redress, closure. So we've talked about that. So, and again, if you want to learn more about reparations, go back and listen to the couple of episodes that we've done on the Joe and Cat Chats podcast, specifically about reparations. They're important episodes. Part of the reason why I wanted to get on the Joe Nice network today is twofold. Number one, to let everybody know about the joenicedj.net website, joenicedj.net, and the new Instagram account, Shop Joe Nice DJ. Again, if you want your merchandise, if you want clothing with a conscience and merchandise with a message, or merch with a message, head over to joenicedj.net. We'll take care of you. We got everything sorted out. We got everything organized. A lot of different designs, a lot of different articles and garments to wear. There's stuff there for everybody, and there's more stuff along the way, coming along the way. So be patient. If there's something that you would like to have in a color that's not on the website, send an email to shopjoenicedj@gmail.com, and we'll sort it out for you. It's that easy. The main reason why I wanted to get on today is to discuss 1 year since the unfortunate and unreasonable murder of George Floyd. Today is 1 year when we saw Derek Chauvin kneel on the neck of George Floyd for over 9 minutes. Today is 1 year since that has happened. What has changed in the United States? What reforms have taken place as a result of George Floyd being murdered? How has America learned anything from the murder of George Floyd? Has the world learned anything from the police state that we are living in right now? What are the next steps? What do we do next? How do we make sure that there is not another George Floyd? Well, we already know the answer to that question because, according to various reports, there have been close to 1,000 police I'm sorry, 1,000 people that have been killed by police officers from this date last year until now. Almost 1,000. There have been, I forget the exact number, just over 400 people that have been killed by police this year. This year. And we are about 150 days into the year. So, again, we are living in a police state. What did we learn from? Did we learn anything from last year? We saw not only did the George Floyd protests spark a reckoning of race relations in the United States, but it also revitalized and rejuvenated the Black Lives Matter movement across the United States. We saw it happen. Additionally, we saw, at least what I've seen, is renewed activism around the world in various countries. We saw that people were not going to just sit down, roll over, and lie dead in the streets for police or their governments. We've also seen that more people are willing to risk their lives for humanity, freedom, equality, and survival. And that's important because we only have one life to live, and this is it. We only have one life to live, and this is it. What did we learn from last summer? Not much. I don't think we learned much of anything, quite honestly. Let me rephrase that. We actually did learn something. I think what we learned from last summer is that a whole lot of people actually don't care about people who are oppressed. There's been a lot of faux activism, or as I'd like to say, woke theatrics, since the George Floyd murder. We had corporations go ahead and put Black Lives Matter on t-shirts and on their basketball courts and on their football fields and on their baseball diamonds and on their hockey rinks. We had plenty of people put the words Black Lives Matter on their uniforms. We had plenty of people put Black Lives Matter on Instagram or use black squares on Instagram. But when it's time to actually support Black people, or when it's time to actually stand up for Black people or Indigenous people or people of color, or quite honestly, Palestinians, the same people that went ahead and did their faux activism were nowhere to be seen. They weren't in the streets. They weren't donating to local charities that support Black people, Indigenous people, Palestinians, and people of color. They weren't doing anything to support refugees and asylum seekers and victims of human trafficking, etc. They were nowhere to be seen. And that is what I think we learned from last summer. What we learned is that a whole lot of people don't actually care about anything but themselves. What I think we learned from last summer, that I think most people learned from last summer, is there's a whole lot of people that are selfish and are unwilling to sacrifice. There's a lot of people that are unwilling to do something that is bigger than them. There's a lot of people that are unwilling to take a look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves difficult questions about how they deal with people who do not look like them, do not sound like them, or do not speak like them, or do not listen to the same music that they do, or do not practice the same religion that they do, or do not eat the same food that they do. There's a lot of people, I think, that need to look at inside of themselves and ask themselves difficult questions that they know they don't want the answers to. Because if they know the answers to those questions already before they even ask the question, they'll have to go ahead and do the difficult, soul-searching, time-consuming, lifelong work that it will take to change their ways. And a lot of people are not willing to do that. Because nobody wants to admit that they're wrong. Not many people want to admit that they've made a mistake. Not many people want to look at themselves and say, you know what, damn it, I really messed this up. What we've also learned is that the United States government, and we've seen this through the Trump presidency and now with the Biden presidency, does not care about anybody but themselves. We've seen it. We're seeing it now. We're seeing it now. Again, on this date a year ago, George Floyd was murdered. Derek Chauvin just went to trial and was convicted of murder, of second and third degree murder, a little more than a month ago. The other three officers, J. Alexander Kung, Thomas Lane, and Tu Tao, the other three officers that stood by and looked on. Actually, Tu Tao looked on. The other two officers, J. Alexander Kung and the other gentleman, Thomas Lane, they participated in George Floyd's murder. Their trial doesn't happen until sometime next year. And Derek Chauvin right now is in jail. He's behind bars, and I think he is facing a maximum of 40 years in prison, which essentially should make sure he stays behind bars for the rest of his life. If Derek Chauvin gets sent away for 40 years, the other three officers involved in George Floyd's murder should also get 40 years in prison. Because they were there. They participated. They were just as involved and just as guilty. Just as guilty. Getting back to the government, I've said this before and I will continue to say it again. If the United States federal government had a federal jobs program or a federal jobs guarantee, or actually did something a little more than a year ago to make sure that everybody had the financial security that they needed through a universal basic income and stimulus payments, George Floyd would not have needed to pass a counterfeit $20 bill at Cup Foods in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If everybody had health care, universal health care, actually, let me rephrase that, single payer health care. So if everybody had health care across the United States, because George Floyd had COVID at the time he was killed, George Floyd would have been able to isolate in his home. And he would have been like everybody, a lot of these other people that are using all of these delivery services to avoid physical contact with other people. He could have ordered his food with DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever service he wanted to use. He could have had his groceries delivered to him. He could have successfully isolated and avoided trying to pass a fake $20 bill inside a convenience store in downtown Minneapolis. Then again, if African Americans in the United States had reparations, police might not be looking at Black people as second-class citizens or third-class citizens. So again, I want people to understand whenever I do these conversations are more involved and bigger than just the immediate situation taking place. Yes, it's important to look at the what, but more important is the why. Why did this happen? What are the factors that led to George Floyd being in a situation so dire that he needed to pass a counterfeit $20 bill? What are the conditions that led to George Floyd not having health care, not even health insurance, health care? Because health care is what people need. People don't need health insurance. People need health care. Why didn't he have it? What are the factors that led to that? What sort of reforms have come from George Floyd being murdered, specifically for Black people? None. None. Asian Americans have been brutalized as a result of the pandemic, and they've faced their share of discrimination before, obviously. We've talked about that in several episodes of the Joe and Cat Chat series. But the federal government passed a bill giving Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders special protections. and it is called the COVID-19 Asian American and Pacific Islanders Hate Crime Bill. I think that is what it's called. But the words COVID-19 are in it. So because the words COVID-19 are in it, it's safe to assume that this hate bill was written as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and increased aggressions towards Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And that bill was written start to finish and passed within a little more than a year. And again, I've said this before and I will say it again. Black people have been catching hell and dealing with white supremacy, persecution, capitalism, segregation, patriarchy, slavery, hate, inequality, genocide, colonialism, and racism since August 20th, 1619. And again, Black people did not get anything from the United States Constitution until the 13th Amendment. Which was ratified in 1865, which meant Black people were no longer slaves. I want people to think about this before we move forward. The United States became a country, or this land that we now occupy, actually the land that was taken from indigenous people, became a country, an independent country, a sovereign nation on July 4th, 1776. The first Africans that were trafficked from now present-day Angola by Spanish and Portuguese slave ships landed on Point Pleasant, Virginia, which is now known as Fort Monroe, Virginia, which is in the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area, on August 20th, 1619. The institution of slavery is older than the institution and failed social experiment that is the United States of America. And then almost 100 years after the institution of the United States became a sovereign nation, Black people became officially recognized as people. Because before the ratification of the 13th Amendment, Black people were not considered people. Black people were considered property. One of the many books that I've talked about is Black Banking and the Racial Wealth Gap by Professor Mercer Baradaran. If you read the first 2 or 3 chapters, it's an incredibly difficult read, not necessarily because of the subject matter, but because of what is actually being discussed. How Black people were used as collateral, how Black people were used as were traded like bonds or stocks. It's in the book, read it. Fast forward to this time last year, 2020. And what we saw with George Floyd was a modern day lynching. That is what we saw. Fast forward to now. We've seen plenty of Black people being killed in the streets by police officers. And many of those cases that we've seen have not been adjudicated. Additionally, we've seen Black people being killed by white police officers, and charges were neither not filed or officers were acquitted. What happened with Breonna Taylor? I was at the protests in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, when they had the hearing about maybe 3.5 weeks ago for Andrew Brown Jr., who was shot and killed several times by Elizabeth City, North Carolina police officers. The district attorney decided to not file any charges against the police officers who shot and killed Andrew Brown Jr. behind the wheel of his vehicle. We still don't know what is happening with the case involving Jonathan Price, the case involving Jacob Blake, the case involving Rashard Brooks, the case involving Daniel Prude. We still don't know. The case involving Ahmaud Arbery. The case involving Walter Wallace Jr., we still don't know what is happening. And again, just like I said in that status quo interview, well, it really wasn't even an interview. It was just me speaking on camera extemporaneously and candidly. I said, the Congress right now is not doing anything, especially the Congressional Black Caucus. You mean to tell me with all the Black people we have in the Congressional Black Caucus that none of them could do anything to get the George Floyd crime bill passed? None of them could do anything to get any sort of additional protections for Black people in this country? Nothing? Nothing? I mean, there's not one member of the squad that could say, you know what? I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to organize a strike. And I'm going to organize a strike intra-industry and inter-industry until Black people get extra protections just like everybody else does. And just to show you how backwards this country actually is, we shouldn't actually need extra protections. Why? Because the United States Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law, which is the 14th Amendment. Which is why I said at the People's Power Assembly last year, we need to remix the Constitution, rewrite it, put it in Google Docs, start all over. Because how could you have equal protection under the law? And the laws are supposed to protect everybody. When one set of people gets one set of protections and the other set of people don't get any protections. What are we dealing with? Got a couple of comments here. Maxwell Bliss with a quote saying, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. Friedrich Nietzsche. That's so true. That's so true. And that could be, we're seeing that a lot with members of the progressive wing, and I say progressive with air quotes, of the Democratic Party. We've seen people like an AOC or an Ayanna Pressley or a Jamal Bowman or an Ilhan Omar or the leader of the Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, Mondaire Jones. We've seen members of the Progressive Party try to fight these monsters. But yet, what have we seen? We've seen, for example, AOC with 12 million Twitter followers and not try to do anything to force a vote to force a floor vote for health care, for Medicare for all on the floor of the House of Representatives. We've seen several members of the squad be relatively quiet with respect to the Palestinians who were being slaughtered by Israeli Defense Forces. And Maxwell, this quote is so apropos and so correct, because in many instances, what they've done is they've tried to fight monsters, and they have in turn become monsters unto themselves. And that abyss that they stare at is the Washington, D.C. political apparatus. And that abyss is staring back at them saying, you better not step out of line, or else we will crush you. Rocco saying, I support your movement, Joe. I support you, Rocco. Thank you, brother. Kyle saying, it's disgusting the lack of anything the Biden administrator, I know you probably meant to say administration, has done after the promise to do while campaigning. Kyle, you're 1,000% correct. I've sat in this chair in front of this wall with these two ring lights on this exact MacBook Air that I've had for a long time now. And I might want to maybe invest in a new one, but it's gotten me through both graduate schools, so I'm thankful for that. Be that as it may, I have said for months upon months now, the election was in November, it's May 25 now. I've said that Joe Biden is worse than Trump. I've said that ad nauseum. In fact, the incredible Cat Wells and I, we devoted an entire episode to the Joe and Cat Chats podcast, specifically discussing Joe Biden and his cabinet. We talked about it. We talked about the cast of characters, criminals, ne'er-do-wells, miscreants, deviants, nincompoops, idiots, and jackasses, and war criminals, and financial speculators, and charlatans that are in Joe Biden's cabinet. We talked about all of them. We mentioned them by name. We gave you a brief history of all of them. The only person we didn't talk about is Lloyd Austin. I don't think we mentioned Lloyd Austin because at the time of the recording, Lloyd Austin was not necessarily the first choice for the Secretary of Defense. We mentioned a lady named Michelle Flournoy. We didn't speak about Lloyd Austin, but everybody else that we talked about on that show eventually became, and Neera Tanden, we mentioned her, but everybody else that we talked about, from Alexander Mayorkas, Kamala Harris, Avril Haines, Gina Raimondo, Janet Yellen, Samantha Power, we mentioned all of them. We talked about all of them. All of them. And everything that we talked about and said back then with their cabinet is coming to fruition now. Every single thing. And I have outlined on dozens of occasions why Joe Biden always has been and will be considerably worse than Donald Trump. Again, Joe Biden supported busing back in 1972 when he was just a lowly state senator from Delaware. He eulogized Strom Thurmond at Strom Thurmond's funeral. Strom Thurmond ran for the presidency of the United States under the Dixiecrat Party, which is a party that supported segregation. This is in 1956. Go look it up. Joe Biden wrote the bill involving civil asset forfeiture, where if the police think you are suspected of committing a crime, the police have the authority to take your assets, and they don't have to give it back to you. If the cops think you're involved in a crime, the cops can take your shit. That is civil asset forfeiture. Joe Biden wrote that bill. Happened in 1984. Look up the civil asset forfeiture bill of 1984. I think that's exactly what the bill is called. Joe Biden's name is on it. He sponsored, wrote the bill. It's passed. Joe Biden wrote the Anti-Drug Act of 1988, otherwise known as the crack bill, which instituted mandatory minimum sentencings for crack and less harsh penalties for cocaine possession and or usage. Joe Biden wrote the Omnibus Crime Bill of 1994, which quadrupled the prison population, put billions of dollars into militarizing the police. It paved the way for the private prison industry and the prison industrial complex. And it also criminalized non-payment of child support. So if you don't pay your child support, you go to jail and you get your driver's license taken away. Good luck finding a job if you don't have a license and you've been behind bars for a few years because you couldn't pay child support. So essentially, Joe Biden's crime bill fuels recidivism. Fuels recidivism. Joe Biden wrote that bill. Joe Biden wrote the Counterterrorism Act of 1995. The Counterterrorism Act of 1995 is essentially the precursor for the Patriot Act. The Counterterrorism Act never got passed in Congress. But when September 11th, 2001 happened, so we're coming up on 20 years of that, when that happened, George Bush asked Joe Biden to go ahead and rewrite that bill, put some more money into it, and remix it and call it the Patriot Act. Joe Biden also wrote the RAVE Act, which involved drugs and reducing the amount of ecstasy that's used in nightclubs. That again involved putting more money into police. Joe Biden supported every single war that we've ever had over the past 50 years. Joe Biden supported the bankruptcy laws, changing the bankruptcy laws so you can no longer discharge medical bills with bankruptcy, and you can no longer discharge federal student loans with bankruptcy. Joe Biden supported both of those bills. Joe Biden is also against Medicare for all. He's against Medicare for all, and he's against the Green New Deal. Tell me how that is any different than Donald Trump. Tell me how that is even any better than Donald Trump. Tell me how that is building back better again. Tell me how what he is doing now, when he's now said with this $4 trillion infrastructure bill, which is woefully inadequate, by the way, that he's no longer going to forgive any student loan debt, and he is no longer going to do anything with respect to giving everybody health care in the United States. Tell me how that is pushing him left. Because all we heard in late November and early December, actually not even late November, all we heard in September when everybody was figuring out what to do with schools, and all we heard in October when all the parents and all the suburban Y moms and driving range dads were figuring out what to do with their kids for Halloween. Get him elected, then we'll push him left. Let's get him elected and we'll push him left. And just like I said in that interview with Status Quo and my guy John Farina about almost a month ago, how is that working out for you? How is that working out for you? How is that pushing left working out for you? Has that job program come around yet? Has he defunded the Pentagon? No. In fact, they put more money into it. Have they stopped giving money to Israel every day so Israel could continue to brutalize and murder and kill Palestinians? Nope. They just they had another bill for $735 million of weapons. Is the government even talking about another stimulus package? Nope. We were promised $2,000 checks if Joe Biden got elected. He said those checks will go out the door immediately. What happened? We waited 7 or 8 weeks and we got $1,400. Democrats negotiated against themselves with this latest stimulus package and talked the money down from $500, actually $600 to $400 to $300 a week. And I said this in a previous podcast, $300 a week divided by 40 hours is $7.50. Joe Biden does not support a $15 federal minimum wage. And the minimum wage right now is $7.25 an hour. $7.25 per hour. So right now, people who are collecting unemployment are receiving the federal additional $300 per week, plus whatever benefits you get from your state. If you were working a minimum wage job before this pandemic, getting paid $7.25 per hour, and you know you're not getting a raise, there's no incentive to go to work. Why bother? The federal government is actually paying you 25 cents more per hour than your job. And employers are not willing to pay a $15 minimum wage. And when people began to start the fight for 15 a decade ago, $15 an hour was an inadequate minimum wage. If the minimum wage was tied to workers' productivity now, the minimum wage would be approaching $27 an hour. And there are several studies, economic studies from independent economic research organizations that have talked about what the federal minimum wage would be if it was tied to worker productivity and involved in added inflation. $27 an hour. And people are out here fighting for 15 and can't get 15. Again, how is that any better than Trump? At least under Trump, we all got $600 a week. And $600 a week divided by 40 hours equals $15 an hour. So what I want to know is how come all of the politicians that said, hey, yeah, I support a $15 minimum wage, didn't support a $600 per week stimulus payment? I don't know what to tell you people anymore. I don't know what to tell you people. I don't know what to say anymore. But I've said enough for today. I've said enough for today. I want to thank each and every one of you that watched and that continue to participate with the live and direct chat series. And later today, 3:30, Joe and Kat chats. Me, Kat, Rue Johnson. We're going to talk about the meaning of life. It's going to be a rather interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to that discussion. Once again, joenicedj.net. If you want clothing with a conscience and merch with a message, go there. Go there. If you like what you see there, tell a friend. If you don't like what you see there, tell me. It's that easy. Whatever changes need to be made, I'll make sure they get made. All right? But again, clothing with a conscience, merch with a message. That's it. Peace and love to all. Thanks.